Well, good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to the Level Set Show. I am Larry Fields, and I'm joined this morning by the Mike Jones and the Dr. Charles Alexander. And we are going to hop right in today.
And I'm a community university grad with two Morehouse men. So what does So I guess this is a democratic community, right?
And in the words of I believe it was Carter G. Woodson that he found that one of the most effective schools he ever saw were children being taught up under a tree. And we were mimicking that today because we're learning from Mike Jones up under the tree. But we want to dive right into the 14th Amendment as we talk and deal with this piece regarding the this 250-year um, uh, I guess birthday or anniversary for this place we call the United States. And we're going to go directly to the 14th Amendment, which was ratified in 1868. We had this anniversary just this past week. And during Reconstruction, it established the birthright citizenship and guarantees all individuals equal protection of the laws and due process of law, prohibits states from depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without these federal protections. Uh, I just finished up a petition on behalf of a client that had these deprived, and I had that exact language in its own paragraph. So these are things that we use on a day in and day out basis. And the Supreme Court most recently returned a decision that impact a major aspect of that birthright citizenship, aspect of the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship. But uh, don't be dismayed. The 14th Amendment is much grander than that. This is almost a catch-all that guarantees that all citizens, despite any immutable characteristic, and immutable meaning things that you can't mute, such as your age, your sex, your national origin, gender, those are things that you can't change. So if you're discriminated against based on an immutable characteristic, the 14th Amendment has been impacted regardless of what state laws are at play. And those are actions. And of course, the rubric for determining liability still varies from state to state. And oftentimes is predicated on what the judge had for breakfast that morning. But that is the randomness of being in this place. So what we're going to do today is talk about that and the impact of the Supreme Court's decision regarding that. So I'm opening the floor up and I'm going to go directly to thee, Mike Jones. Good morning.
Good morning. Glad to be back after taking a couple of games off. So now, Larry, I the longer I have thought about the 14th Amendment and us and our overall political strategy, I think we have mischaracterized or the premise, or got the wrong premise for our struggle. Our struggle always should have been the 14th Amendment, should have been the foundation of the argument. And this, if you take the language, what an amendment is fundamentally to amend is to change. And so an amendment to a document or an agreement changes everything that the document and agreement said before. It's not the same. Whatever the original was, it's now different per this amendment. So if you and to me, this is the key. The 10th Amendment of the Constitution says any powers not expressly given to the federal government by default belong to the states. And I would suggest that up until 1868, the passing of the 14th Amendment, it means if the Constitution didn't expressly say it, a state could do it. I mean, and would have the benefit of the law and the Constitution, even if you disagree with the morality of it. 14th Amendment changes all of that. It basically elevates a citizen, the individual, and it says no state has the authority to mitigate any of the rights that are inherent with being a citizen. So our argument, and that's where you could kind of argue that the whole civil rights movement was based on a flawed premise. It was based on we need laws to ensure our rights. Now, what we need to ensure our rights is the enforcement of the United States Constitution. And literally, and he caught a lot of heat for it, but that was literally Barry Goldwater's argument about why you didn't need a Civil Rights Act. That literally, you already got a Constitution that says all the things you got a problem with, you can't do. And the federal government, by extension, is then empowered to enforce that Constitution. So literally, you could have said that the Supreme Court could have easily, just as it had the constitutional authority and paradigm to say all this shit, all the segregation law, all that shit is fundamentally unconstitutional because it deprives a United States citizen of equal protection under the law, which no state has the authority to do. Per the 14th Amendment. Don't tell me about the 10th. Don't tell me about anything else, because the 14th changes the Constitution. We've never argued that. As a matter of fact, that's even a conservative argument. If you just take from a classical political philosophy, you don't need a radical new theory. I'll keep the one you got and just make you apply it. I think we had a conversation not too long ago about Chief Justice Taney's decision in the Dred Scott case. And we came to the conclusion that in 53, when was Dred Scott? 1850 what?
52, I believe, is the final.
That's what I think. That's what I think.
Rendering.
Yeah, right. And we said that under the Constitution and the jurisprudence and the law, he really made the only decision you could make. And that's why the 14th Amendment is designed to overturn that Dred Scott opinion. I mean, literally, and it's our lack of understanding, we don't connect those two arguments. That without Dred Scott, you don't get a 14th Amendment. Because Taney's opinion has merit prior to the 14th Amendment. It has no standing after the 14th Amendment. And we spent another 100 and some years arguing about some statutes and other, I'll say, administrative bullshit, when you could have argued the Constitution and made that the argument.
Well, one part of that is our seeking confirmation on the fact that this place is decent, when in fact the place was not decent, and built on that foundation was what we got in that opinion. And so what has happened mentally is individuals have tried to separate that opinion from this place. but that opinion, as you just stated, was a reflection of this place. And so, if you have a true reflection of what this place is and where you are, you're forced to act in a certain manner. And I don't think that we've got the maturity overall to act in the manner that you would have to act in when institutionally one of the tenets of the place that you're in says that you have no rights that another race has to respect. That is a that's a harsh radical statement and a reality that we don't want to confront. And because if you do confront it, there is an issue, and there is a certain amount of agency that you have to take in that, and there's a certain amount of fallout associated with that. So,
Yeah, and I would suggest that the framers of the 14th Amendment understood that, because basically they were also the framers of the 13th Amendment. And if you did this in the 13th with the 13th Amendment, it don't mean anything unless you create this other constitutional right that modifies and controls every the Constitution and every amendment that came before it. And I understand why the most reactionary white interests in this place have never bought into that 14th Amendment, but they would want to fight on these tactical statutory arguments all the time. Matter of fact, one of the dissents in two of the dissenters in the recent in the recent
Birthright.
birthright citizenship literally was Gorsuch and Kavanaugh as a dissenter. Gorsuch basically voting with the majority, but didn't support their opinion because he said it should have been decided on statutory basis, and that meant that you could still leave it open as a constitutional question. What the five did was close the door. They fundamentally said, no, it's a constitutional issue, and that's what the Dred Scott Taney opinion did. It made our status a constitutional issue, which means the correct solution was another constitutional issue. So Dred Scott required the 14th Amendment.
And let's go back.
This ruling.
Let me read a synopsis because we banter about with Taney's opinion. We don't oftentimes furnish the language, but the key points of his opinion is Taney declared black people so far inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. Enslaved people were classified as property under the Fifth Amendment, and Taney ruled Congress lacked the power to ban slavery in U.S. territories. Because Scott was not a citizen, the Supreme Court lacked jurisdiction to hear the case.
Right. And I think what happens is we get stuck on your first sentence. The issue is everything he says after that. Because we keep processing the whole thing from today. So now we are citizens, then we were property. And so there's nothing, so we just think it's a heinous statement, but it's really, really a statement of fact. The Constitution was not established with us in mind. There was no intention on making us citizens. And because we weren't citizens, there was no merit in bringing a case because you weren't a citizen, period. Let's go on to the 14th. So we
let's go to the 13th first.
Well, we got to get to the 13th, yes,
Because the
but
13th,
that then
yeah,
frees us,
yeah,
right? But even in the 13th, we argue a point, this whole notion that they added a loophole. No, that slavery piece, except slavery, except for the criminal, is a part of how they even got white folks to the United States, to what became the United States.
right.
That is just a function of English common law. That's how they peopled or colonized what became the United States. That's how they peopled what became Australia. Australia was a penal colony. And so this thought that they created that as if they needed to create something to treat us crazy after 250 years of slavery is ridiculous. But again, it's us not reading virtually anything and then blaming them for us not reading it. And so those two things, it's our mischaracterization and misunderstanding of those two things. Like I've seen and heard conversations in which people are, people go back to Tanny, they go back to that statement, to the initial statement, the black man has no blah 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 blah, and ask, so is that still in existence? When did that ever get dealt with? Because they have no, conceptual understanding of the 14th or the purpose of it.
And
And
to,
if
to
that,
your to
and
your
it's that
point,
historical, yeah,
to your point, in order for a court to hear a case, it has to have two forms of jurisdiction: personal jurisdiction and subject matter jurisdiction. Federal courts are courts of limited jurisdiction. State courts are courts of general jurisdiction. And so, what Tanny said was, we don't even have personal jurisdiction over Dred Scott because he's not a person as far as citizenship goes. Go ahead, Mike.
no, and all I was going to say is it's our ignorance of the historical facts and what those facts imply, mean expressly and imply by their very existence. Our failure to know and then understand that, then you miss the whole point of it, and everything that happened in Jim Crow after the collapse of Reconstruction was designed to mitigate the 14th Amendment.
Correct.
And that the reason the post-Civil War Republicans in the Congress had no issue with anything that they were doing at the expense of the Confederacy, the Confederate South, was fundamentally because the 14th Amendment gave them the authority to rectify the discrepancy between these two classes of citizens now, black citizens and white citizens. That there is no constitutional justification for state-sanctioned discrimination. Now, I can be a personal bigot all I want, so it wasn't even designed to change how I feel about you. It was designed to address what I can do about you. Okay? And we get caught up in this church bullshit about how people feel and what they like. No, it's all about what they can do and what they can't do.
What they can and can't do.
Right. And the law defines the limits of your activity inside the context of civil society, period. And you don't have to like me. I don't never have to like you. Because they don't have to, the reason I ain't big on equity, what is it? We got diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because it's people I would never want to be bothered with. They don't never have to send me an invitation because I ain't coming.
I ain't trying to go.
Right. Yeah, I ain't trying to go. And because of that, we misinterpreted ultimately what the civil rights movement was about. The civil rights movement was about basically inherently reestablishing the primacy of the 14th Amendment because it was about desegregating America, not integrating America. It was about eliminating the legal barriers to your right as a citizen who happened to be black from having access to the public square.
And
which
so
was
and
what,
go ahead, Doc.
which was, so when we get to Brown,
Right.
and Brown is necessary to strike down Plessy versus Ferguson,
Right.
which legalizes the segregation. And so the 14th Amendment in that case is used for the purpose of the protection of our rights and due process at the state
That's
level.
why that's why the Warren Court could say, and Gerald's on now, both of y'all are attorneys. That's why the Warren Court could say that separate is inherently unequal. They weren't talking about black schools. They were talking about you can't treat black citizens different than you treat white citizens per the 14th Amendment. Okay, so that was a 14th Amendment case. That wasn't a goddamn civil rights case. That was an express interpretation of what the 14th Amendment or the framers of the 14th Amendment meant when they wrote it and they passed it. And that's how you get birthright citizenship, because that's what it said.
Because that's what it says, and that's what it's for, and it expressly, and it's express, and so, and again, why it's important today is because we don't understand that that's how we become citizens, and we become citizens because of birthright, not because of the mere ending of slavery.
Right.
And so we don't understand, the sequencing and the meaning and the implications. And so the 13th doesn't grant us citizenship. It just makes us not slaves, and it makes us citizens by virtue of the fact, not because we were slaves, but because we were born here.
Wait a minute. Right. Now, the, there are 4 million people, and by extension, the non-enslaved, but there are 4 million enslaved black people in America that become citizens as a function of the 13th Amendment. Everybody black born after that is a citizen as a function of the 14th Amendment. And so if you're born here, you're a citizen, period. That's what the Constitution said. So whatever the Constitution said in 1789 don't mean shit. The 14th Amendment in 1868 modifies what it addresses. It modifies everything that was
Proceeding.
said before
Proceeding.
about citizenship and who's a citizen and how they are to be treated. And it takes active ignorance to misunderstand the political impact of that statement. That ought to be the spot we fight on. That we ought to be the biggest advocates of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And you can argue, if you are a classical conservative, you got to support that too. You need a whole different argument if you conservative, because the Constitution ahead of you 100+ years ago has already determined that. So what is your basis? What are you arguing? And what's the foundational basis of it? What's the legal constitutional basis of any of the shit that you're doing?
Want to welcome Jerry L.T. Christmas, attorney at law. As you can see, Attorney Christmas, we are grappling with the inability of modern day leaders to deal with the 14th Amendment in its proper context, which is ironic, because had you read King, you would hear King constantly talking about, I want you to do what you said you were and be who you said you are on paper.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, and and that was before the passage of the Civil Rights Act. And just do what you say you are on paper. Now he misquoted.
He says that in DC.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. And now he miscategorized schizophrenia when he talked about America
He did
clinically.
that.
He clinically, but we understand what we know what he
We
meant.
know what he was
He
talking
meant
about,
he
but
meant bipolar because you are one thing in the marketplace and you are another thing on paper. And
really more like borderline. But go ahead.
but I'm sorry, I don't want to step on any toes, but you go ahead and opine and welcome. Glad to see you, Dr.
What's up,
Jerry L.
Attorney Christmas?
Good morning. I'm down here in Alabama, and
Oh,
all
wonderful.
of that rings true when you get down here. You get down to the basics of what you're discussing because it's right here in your face. When I'm down here, I'm in Dothan, Alabama, which is near the Alabama Florida line. I'm 90 miles from Panama City,
Hmm.
and so when you down here in the South and you interacting um, with both Southern white and black people,
Hmm.
you see definitely those differences. And we were just having this discussion down here, but I was having it more in reference to the 13th Amendment than I was to the 14th Amendment, because the 13th Amendment allows for servitude only through criminal punishment, and it's through the 13th Amendment that all our people are incarcerated now through this form of slavery.
But Gerald, in that conversation, are you making it clear to folks that they didn't add or create that for us? That is a function of English law. That's how they,
Right.
but
Go
and
ahead.
so we keep telling ourselves, and I think this is a part of how we end up, how our strategies get impaired. We start with a premise that the conversation or the power in the conversation is even. So as if they would have to come up with a way to treat us wrong. They ain't got to come up with no way to treat us wrong. This is what they do. And so the way that we talk about is, well, they had added this loophole. That's not a loophole. That's how they function. Not relative to us. That's how they function. We just are a victim to it. And so, but I don't think we understand. Like if you go back and you read the
Doc,
articles.
I see what you're doing with that statement, but if you could expand it, because
Okay.
that is a piece that we forget and we tend and I just think that we need to harp on what you're saying foundational and but I want to please hash
It
that
is
out.
foundational. And so part
And
of
we
how
intentionally
they,
don't look at that as being intentional. We think that just happened. That was not intentional.
correct. And it's a vestige again of how the English system of law works. And so this is how a portion of the colonists got here because they were criminals and they were sent here to work off their debt. That's how they got here. That's how they got to Australia. It was a penal colony. They were sent there to work off their debt. If you read the articles in, I think it's 1787, when they in the formulation of the Northwest Ordinance, in the context of the Northwest territories and the Northwest Ordinance, it's in there that slavery is not permitted in the Northwest territories except for the criminal. It has nothing to do with us per se, because we wasn't even permitted in the Northwest or in the Northwest territories. Those states, those territories, what became Ohio, what became Illinois, Minnesota, they didn't even want black people there. So the ordinance has nothing to do with us. The introduction to that um into the legal and constitutional framework has nothing to do with us per se. It is a vestige of how they function. And then it you might figure it somewhat ironic that that I think the sponsor of both the sponsor or sponsors of both the 13th and the 14th Amendment, were representatives um, from Ohio, which is a part of the Northwest Territory. So, really it might have gotten in there not because we were the formerly enslaved, but because people from the Northwest Territory are responsible for those two amendments. And it's a vestige of their organization, of their legal framework.
So I want to tie what you just said to something that Larry alluded to earlier. One, and you guys were talking about America being bipolar, okay? Not necessarily schizophrenic. And I was thinking about that, and I want to connect it this way, that there always been two Americas. There's always been two white Americas, okay? Let's say that the racism or the racial biases are inherent in Homo sapiens because we're social and tribal. And so when you ain't in my tribe, you're automatically the other. And in a more primitive developmental environment of which is the human state for most of the time we've been Homo sapiens walking upright, is the other is always a potential enemy because you don't know who that is, and so they're on the outside, and our tribal and social instincts that are inherent in humans make you solidify among the people you identify with, and everybody else is a potential adversary. And if you all are aggressive and hostile by nature, you have no problem even attacking people who are not you. It's just kind of like inherent, and people don't like to hear this because they think we think we're superior, but it's behavior you see in chimpanzees on a regular basis. Okay, I mean, and chimp society and human society. Once you strip them all down, we all primates, and there ain't a whole lot of difference between their interaction and Homo sapiens. We'd have been a lot better off if we were more like gorillas because they're much more passive by nature. It's probably because they're bigger than everybody else. They don't have to be chimps or smaller, and to survive, they get to be in bigger clans and stuff. And so it's a different order. So when you think of us as anthropologically as just another species, what's the involvement and why does stuff look a certain way? But what I want to go back to is understanding two Americas. There was always an America, and the Confederacy was the full expression of that, and why they succeeded, that this ought to be a slave society that expanded even to South America. So if you look at the writings, of the Confederate leaders, they wasn't talking about just succeeding from the United States. They were talking about we need to do this so we can have a slave empire.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have another group of white folks who are early stage capitalists. And so by the 1830s, the first phase of the Industrial Revolution is kicking in. And the one thing that capitalism will attack is caste agrarian economic system. And you can't have slavery without caste agrarian economy, because that's why you need the slave labor for the agrarian economy. nobody in a capitalist society wants slave labor because they don't want to have to maintain and support labor. They want to exploit it, but they don't want to have to be trapped with it. And so by freeing up the labor, I can underpay you and then distort you. In the agrarian slave society, it's a caste system, which is more important than even the agrarian economy. And I have to maintain this structure, even when it don't make economic sense, because it supports the social. It's the way we're organized socially. Now, we're completely ignorant of all of that. Now, all this shit I just said, you ain't got to be no anthropologist or no PhD in history to know. I mean, if you're fairly literate and got a modicum of intellectual curiosity, you can find out everything I just said. Matter of fact, you can Google the shit I just said and come up with the information. You ain't even got to read a whole book on it. So we don't understand the Civil War as a struggle between an agrarian caste system and an emerging early stage capitalist economy. That's the fucking conflict. Didn't nobody like us, okay? So the point was we were a byproduct of that argument. We got enslaved because they had an agrarian caste system. We got free because they were early stage capitalism. But didn't nobody have it was never about us. And I would even suggest the 13th and the 14th Amendment had more to do with trying to quash the reemergence of of an agrarian caste society than it had to do with humanity towards us. And since the northern states, though they won the war, they were spent at the end of that. And they didn't have either the means and probably lacked the will to actually finish off the South. And if they could get peace and their dominance economically by accommodating them on the issue of race, hey, they never gave it a second thought, which is why the 14th Amendment has never meant after 1778, during Jim Crow and on, the 14th Amendment never gets reintroduced into American political and rarely American jurisprudence in the manner in which it was intended to be. Because the deal between northern white folks and southern white folks to accommodate and create some type of tribal unity, we are the price for that. You know, and because to maintain tribal unity, large tribal unity, you need scapegoats. Okay, for 100 years they were black, and now they are immigrants of color. And for a hot minute, they were European immigrants in the late 18th century, early part of the 20th century. But they can make European immigrants white after they got here. They can't do that with us Mexicans and everybody else. And that's where the racial caste system conflicts with fundamentally what you got in a laissez-faire capitalist-driven economy. Now, all this shit sounds complicated, but it ain't. It's fairly simple, and there's literally nobody who's been to college that shouldn't understand and know what I just said.
But part of the reason that folks can go to college and not know what you said, because if you don't say it's Black history, then we believe it's not relevant and they're not teaching us something. And so we like literally collectively don't appreciate that knowledge is good for its own sake. And so, you know, we've checked out and given ourselves license to check out if it doesn't explicitly say Black history. And so if you don't understand why the colonies were founded, and you don't understand why there was a Revolutionary War, and you don't understand the war measures that were enacted during the Revolutionary War, then you get caught up with the hubris of the Emancipation Proclamation. The first Emancipation Proclamation is given by the British to us in order to fight the colonies.
Right.
And so, but we don't understand it that way, even though we know that, like some of us know that, that there were Black folks fighting for the Brits. But if you don't understand if you don't understand that, then you just necessarily misinterpret whatever occurs with Lincoln.
And you run around saying stupid stuff like I'm not my ancestors.
And you run around saying stupid stuff. And another part, to add in terms of that industrial piece, Mike, is that even with the Brits, they're not deciding that so in the context of the in the times leading up to the Revolutionary War and during and after the Revolutionary War, they're not saying that we are humans. They just tired of getting their asses kicked in the islands by the enslaved. And so that's another thing that we don't really talk about here is, I mean, we talk about Haiti, but we don't talk about the Jamaicans was kicking the British tail the whole time. And so part of the reason why they was like, we ain't gonna do this no more is because it was getting increasingly expensive to fund um to fund the suppression of the enslaved in the British properties in the Caribbean, as well as funding the United States or the colonists expansioning, expansion, their westward and southwestern expansion and the continuous Indian Wars. And so that also is a part of it, and it also necessitates a move into first the colonizers move into a more industrial model, and then subsequently the what becomes the United States ends up faced with that same thing. But we don't understand it as such because we don't do the deep dives again, because we say, well, this ain't relevant. It's all relevant because all of it has to do with us. If you're talking about the Revolutionary War, you're talking about the Civil War, ain't nobody fighting for us, but they fighting because of us.
That is incredible insight. I don't think individuals understand that there were well over 1,000 insurrections by enslaved Africans in the United States.
Yeah,
Documented.
and and
Well,
and, and kicking their tails then. Um, the reason that there is a state of Georgia is because they needed, because Florida was a Spanish colony, and Spain was harboring uh, fugitives, the escaped, the escaped enslaved Africans were fleeing Virginia and the Carolinas, and they were going to Florida, and they were being armed by Spain to fight and disrupt activities in Carolina and I guess probably the southernmost parts of Virginia. And so all of that is a part of the ongoing, fights and struggles that don't necessarily get documented. But in order for you even to get to that part, you have to learn the larger colonial history in order to be able to posit the revolts, and to be able to look at the various laws. Like when we look at slave codes and black codes, we don't contemplate what precipitated that. Our initial thought always is, they just don't like us. Well,
Right.
those were their responses to what we were doing in response to subjugation. But we don't process it like that. And so when you don't process it like that, then you get back to what Larry just said. Oh, I ain't my ancestors. No, you're not. You soft. You can't.
I'm exactly my ancestor. I'm
Right?
all of them.
All of it. But you gotta have all of those things and understand all of those things in context. While we're sitting around, we end up talking about Crispus Attucks. It was 15 to 20,000 of us who fought for the British, and we ain't fight for the British because we thought the British were right. We fought for the British because they was going to help us beat these guys who were actually here on the ground enslaving us, even though it was the British are the reason that we were here, right? And so that was just a practical decision made at the ground level for those folks. And again, if you don't understand that, then you don't understand.
And,
Go ahead, Mike John.
and no, I was going to say, Charles, literally just to that point, we don't have 21st century black context for it, but the 20th century black context and vocabulary would have said, well, they all white folks, but right now these white folks make more sense than those white folks. But we ain't never not dealt with them as which white group is in our best interest in this moment. Those were not undying loyalties and commitments. We were making the same tactical judgments and strategic moves that they was making. Wasn't nobody friends. Everybody was operating based on how they defined what was in their interest.
And we should think about it in the same way of the gentleman that you affectionately call the old man.
Right.
No permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests.
Interesting. And the other part to add on to that, and I've said this for years, when I'm asked by somebody, they say they're interested in getting involved in politics and what should they do, I always say the same thing. The first thing you need to do is quit going to Sunday school, because it ain't shit you gonna learn in Sunday school that's gonna help you survive what this is. So if the church ain't a front for the revolution that you're planning in the basement, then you really don't need the church.
Well, let's say, and we can say this: unless you have an atypical church, your church is a front for capitalism.
Right.
And so
the problem though is that when you say that, you're gonna be demonized as the devil.
I'm already
demonized. I'm gonna be the devil. I'm
already demonized at this point, because you have played with our lives and been so cavalier, and I feel like an enabler for so many years that we're way past that. You lucky you lucky it's not on site, because just Mike, I think you said it a couple of weeks ago. There are things spiritually and there are things factually that you have to know to have gone through. I bet you, Gerald, I'm talking with my fingers. I had a deposition canceled a couple of weeks ago because someone says I was pointing at them like I'm talking now. So I'm catching myself on camera. But you know what you're saying is a false, derogatory, oppressive doctrine and you know it's a lie, yet you go and exercise it and prosecute it every Sunday. We need to deal with them.
So to that point, so there is a radio network, the Sunrise Network. It's one of those I don't know if it's Falwell or the other guy, but it's they established it, or he established one of them. But anyway, most days I hear at least 3 minutes of it when I'm in my car because um I have kind of like this Sirius audio remote. And so the frequency that I have to use is 88.1. And here that 88.1 frequency is the Sunrise Network. And so when I turn on my car, when I turn on my Sirius, why it's getting set up, it's listening to the Sunrise Network, and I hear them every day at some point of the day integrating not just current, past, and future political, ideological strategy based on their interpretation of the Bible. And you ain't got to get this just on the Sunrise Network, because I know this also from driving back and forth to St. Louis with just my radio on, picking up whatever stations that I get just so I can hear what people are talking about and thinking about. And it's like this for virtually any white Christian radio frequency is a Christian nationalist frequency. And what they are talking about is how they win this thing and how they see the Republican agenda as synonymous with their Christian walk. Meanwhile, we trying to get to heaven.
Right.
What we don't understand is these jokers, they planning on sending you. And so
I think that's exactly right. They
we got
planning
this
on
all wrong.
sending you, and they are also organizing around buying equipment and supplies and
Yes,
ammunition, all of
yes.
these things.
All
All
of these
of these
things,
things.
all of
They are
these
getting
things
ready
that we
for
might,
war.
yes. And then we tell ourselves that, you know, the few people that you know that actually got munitions stockpiled, it's like, bro, you ain't ready for the war.
No.
Because you're gonna run through that and you ain't gonna be able to get nothing else. That's the other part about the whole
That's
thing.
the other problem.
Yeah, you once this thing kicks off, if it ever kicked off like that, you only gonna get one day at this. You're gonna get you're gonna get literally one shot. Because once you run out, you run out. Because we don't have any relationships. To go back to our earliest part of our conversation, we don't have any external relationships. All of our relationships are with this thing that keeps treating us the way that it treats us.
Charles,
And none of our organizations, Dr. Alexander, want to have those conversations. We don't have an entity going on in our community right now that would want to even have that conversation.
I want to do a riff on what Charles just laid out. And for me, the longer I have thought about this, the longer my historical frame of reference becomes, the more I think about it, because particularly in America, there's a level of immediacy about everything. Did nothing happen before the moment you're in if you're American, okay? And we're victim to that same socialization curation as white folks. It might have a black flavor to it, but it's the same shit. If it didn't happen yesterday, that's about as far back as history we go. What I would suggest, Charles, is what you just described, the white Christian nationalist thing. I think for me, as I look at it now, the white Christian nationalists of the 21st century is the medieval Christian church in the 15, 16, 17, early 1700s. No, I'll just say 14, 1500s, where the church was the dominant ideology that provided the political justification, rationalization for the monarchies that were the political hierarchy. And they were negotiating stuff with an emerging merchant class. You know, this is 1500s, early 1600s, is the emergence of capitalism. Contrary to what most people think, capitalism has not been here forever. It's only been here for about 400 or 500 years. Started principally by the Dutch and taken off by the English, but all that shit starts in the 1600s. And something else starts in the 1600s as well, and that's the Enlightenment. Because the Christian hierarchy of the church and the monarchy conflicts with capitalism fundamentally. You don't have and a guy like Thomas Jefferson, who was a product of the European Enlightenment, referred to Christianity as monkish superstition. So literally, you have emerged intellectually in Europe a whole intellectual cultural frame of reference that's just based on empiricism, provable shit, not myth, superstition, or religiosity. But, and with it, that frees up a lot of social political energy and rationalizes a whole different way of organizing society. But the religious hierarchy, and I don't just literally mean a church, but I mean that hierarchical frame of reference that was justified by the Christian church in the Middle Ages, had never accepted the Enlightenment. Now it got defeated, but you could look at the next 300 years of them looking for ways for the church to reemerge. And one of the things that you have to first do to get the church and religiosity to be the driving political philosophy of any society, you have to make everybody ignorant. And literally, the whole intent of the Enlightenment was to make everybody as educated as possible. And I ain't talking about poor people, but literally what would become the middle class and the ruling class. Because if you think about it, Madison and Jefferson as two slaveholders are the founders of public education in America. Okay, now they didn't have universal public education, but they thought public education was critical to a self-governing society, however you define how many people make up a self-governing society. But the damn show was talking about no kings and no popes, for lack of a better word. And they said the last goddamn thing you need in a country is a church, because they was looking at 200 years of European internal wars based on some superstitious shit about whether you're Protestant or Catholic. It was really hiding, really kings fighting for economic and political hegemony in Europe, and then by extension in what was becoming the colonized rest of the world. So when you look at this, and it's the whole drive behind the church is to make people give up their autonomy because, and I'll start an argument with this, and I'm gonna stay on my side of the argument, not with you all, but for anybody listening to this, the biggest problem with religion and God is the way we understand, the way we're taught how to understand God requires you to give up your agency. Okay, that fundamentally you are no longer the sovereign individual. And I'll give you an example of how colonized or how I'll say intellectually and emotionally handicapped we are by religion. If we have any success and we get interviewed, whether you're an athlete or somebody else, we want to say, well, first thing I want to do is thank God. Well, God didn't fucking play today. Okay? and why wasn't God on the other guy's side? He on your side, but he wasn't on the other guy's side, right? So the first thing you do is I want to thank God and all of that. And if we and as average people, when something goes well, we say God is good. And when it's fucked up, we don't say, well, God, why'd you fuck it up today for me? We say, well, he must have had a plan. Both of them make you less than a sovereign individual with your own agency. That I am, what's the last line, the last two lines in Invictus?
Master
I
of
thank
my
my
faith. I'm the master of
the
my faith
captain
and conqueror of my soul.
and the captain of my soul. Right.
And it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the doctrine anyway, because God has told you, number one, Jesus said, you'll do better works
Well,
than I did. You'll do
wait a
better
minute.
works than I did. And on top of that, every single thing in the universe that you need is inside you, including the kingdom of heaven.
Wait
So
a
it's
minute.
a fundamental misunderstanding of everything from the beginning.
Well, I'll go with the Q and me. I'll go with the opening two lines in the Victors. Dark as the night that covers me, black as the pit from
It's from
pole to
pole to
pole.
pole.
I thank whatever God may be
For
for
my
my
unconquerable
unconquerable soul.
Yes, sir. I thank him.
So,
I thank
so
him.
Won't he do it?
if you start there, huh?
I say, won't he do it?
Yeah. So wait a minute, and the man say, I don't know if it's one of them or a lot of them, but whoever it is, I thank them
I thank
for
him.
this. And wait a minute, and then the rest of it's on me. They done with it, okay? But if you defer your fate to some magic, mystical shit that you ain't never seen, that a motherfucker told you about that he ain't never seen. Now that's the damnedest thing.
And then you kind of get what you get,
And
right?
you get what you get.
And then you kind of get what you get. And again, Mike, we and so we find ourselves today having the same ridiculous conversation.
Right.
Ain't nobody told you that either of these parties is perfect. Well, the parties are propaganda, and so they're gonna say whatever they say. But ain't nobody telling you you got to do this. You got to make this decision on your own. And if you can't, then there's something wrong with your conceptualization of, the past, the present, and the future.
And
You vote Democratic not because they're this, that, or the other. You vote them because they ain't that, them, and those.
Right. And that's
Those
a good
people are
enough. That's a good
decided.
enough reason.
Yes. And and listen to these conversations, even talking about Kamala. So it's not enough for her to be talking about she ain't Trump. No, yes, it is. That's enough.
Yes, it is.
That's
Right.
you.
would you say that is a plan? That is a
That's a
plan.
plan. She's not Trump, you know, and but these are the same these are the same decisions that black folks made when 20,000 of them fought for the Brits. It's the same, you know, decision that 200,000 black men made when they fought for the Union. This is in our interest right now.
No.
Not these white folks is better than we like these white folks and these white folks like us. No, them white folks didn't want you even fighting either, but they was getting their asses kicked, so they needed you.
Right.
And you needed them to be, y'all had a common enemy in the peace.
Wait a minute. What you said? What's the Middle Eastern phrase? The enemy of my enemy is my ally.
Is my friend.
He's my friend. Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, same thing now. But oddly enough, we find ourselves, to some degree, at least in the processing of it, less equipped to deal with the practicality, the pragmatic response to it. Now, we can be all mad if we want to, but still 80% of us vote Democratic. And so, and it's not because we are some, liberal-minded people, because most of us are actually very socially conservative. We understand that those people don't have nothing for us.
I would suggest one of our failings in America. I can't speak for the whole world, but I'll talk about black people in America. The church thing is literally nobody in America, nobody black, can tell you about the early history of the formation of the Christian church. Those first 200 years, those first 300 years between Jesus and Constantine. Okay,
Mike Jones, there's no role for scholarship. This is a faith walk.
Yeah, right, exactly. And and so the first thing you got to do when you go back to the beginning is you have to separate Jesus from Paul, because if you take 4 of them books, at least 3 of the 4, Matthew, Mark, you get a historical Jesus that is really highly political and an agent for the oppressed.
He's a revolutionary.
Revolutionary. Wait a minute. In terms of the Roman Empire, revolutionary Jesus. In John, you get mystical Jesus. And you can't talk about, when you talk about the Christian church, you shouldn't be talking about Jesus. You need to talk about Paul. Because without Paul, there is no today what is the Christian church. And it was Paul that created the theology of redemption.
So it's Paul that creates what becomes the organization.
The Orthodox Christianity.
Yeah. For Jesus, the church is the people.
But the avatar that Jesus represents is something that we have never been.
But it don't work.
We've never been exposed to it.
But
its truthfulness, we have never been exposed to Joseph.
But that's because
who went to school as Joseph, and it was not until his training was done that he became Jesus. We know nothing about him because we want to believe everything that he did was divine, when a number of the things that he did we could mimic ourselves and free ourselves. But that's a whole nother class.
But Larry, the point that I would really want to make in that is the historical Jesus is, let's just keep it at avatar. The historical Jesus is a disruptor of the established order.
Yes.
He
Jesus,
socializes and decentralizes religion. And that's why they get
the Jesus of Paul's creation, that theology, mythology establishes and maintains the hierarchical arrangements that are already in existence. So fundamentally, the reason the Christian church after Constantine, Christian theology becomes the theory of power and governance after that. And in exchange
Empire.
for,
similar to Aristotle. He was similar to Aristotle.
well, matter of fact, it takes the place of the Greeks. Okay,
That's
if you really
correct.
want to know the truth, early early political philosophy is a function of the Greeks, principally Plato and Aristotle, and a couple Roman thinkers like Seneca and
Herodotus.
maybe a few more.
Herodotus.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So fundamentally, you got this core, and it was interesting about that. Now they weren't nothing democratic about them, but they were more focused on character and virtue and ruling than they really were the systems
Yeah.
of
In
of
reverse order.
yeah, right. And with the emergence of what was to become the Christian church, what you do is rationalize the existing political order, which is hierarchical, and basically the king is the representative of God, and you can't fuck with the king because you're fucking with God, because that's what the church says now.
You got a pastor right now
So,
talking about I'm going to read from the King James's version. How ignorant! I mean, so kings. So if Trump wrote a book, wrote the Bible,
I mean, but they
king,
are just versions, so that I mean, to that end, it's all the same foolishness. But um,
but
you
we
know,
don't even wait a minute. We hear it without
the thing
understanding
is
what he
kind
just
of
said.
is what you alluded to, Mike.
we go right past it, and we don't even hear where the orientation is coming from. We just accept it, and that is a dangerous pathology.
Well, it
So what
is,
you gonna say?
and it and that one, that one is a long-standing one. That one is like a is, and so
Right.
that is so that's not.
That's tragic too, but it is.
Yeah, that's not a function of how we perceive things today. That's a is. Now the reason that it became a is certainly differs with why it exists today. But you know, even then, even on the front end of this, you again, relative to us, you have to understand that Black folks don't become Christian because of the Copts or the Ethiopians. Black folks become Christians because of the Spanish and I mean because of Spain, Portugal, and Britain. That's why Black folks become
And
Christian.
what do all of them have in common?
And so, but on the front end of that thing, the thoughts center more around, the relative interest in trade, period.
And
Not
Right.
Doc, let me just insert here and get out of the way that it was Pope Alexander the Sixth papal bull that gave Portugal
that
or and
establishes the
Spain
asiento. Correct.
and Portugal and Spain the
Correct.
foundational support to colonize Africa and to enslave.
Correct. So they were
That's the
already
Pope.
doing whatever they needed to do to establish their colonies and what would become the um the Americas. The two of them get to warring, Spain and Portugal, and they set up this relationship. It's called, and this is the church doing this, and they set up this relationship that says, I think
And
Portugal would have the right to um to human traffic the numbers necessary to sustain the Spanish colonies in what was deemed the New World. And so what people have to know is that all nations held the Asiento for some point in time. And I'm not sure if Britain actually held it the longest point of time, but for the time that they held it, they transported the most slaves. But all of this is sanctioned by the Catholic Church.
what I would say is in that moment, right after that, because Portugal more, more control of the shipping lanes. Spain was the other major Catholic religious power, even bigger than France at the time. And the Dutch and the English said, fuck the Pope, okay? If you really want to know the truth. And they ignored all that shit and they went to do the same thing. I brought all of this up not to take us off course, but so we could come back to where we started. And that's what I meant about my view of this keeps getting longer and longer. That you can't understand this moment without an understanding of the moments that preceded it that lead us to this point today. That this ain't a this week conversation or what happened to this year. So Donald Trump is not a product of this moment. He is the embodiment of a whole period of history that now looks like this. But he's existed in different iterations, literally inside of the Western hegemony for the last 400 years, and as just as a metaphor or now you see political in societies, in powerful societies as they were in decline. So you could argue that Donald Trump is Caligula, and the United States Congress looks like the Roman Senate under Caligula, and the only difference is that the president of the Roman Senate, when Caligula was emperor, was a real horse as opposed to a horse-like figure in Mike Johnson. But there are historical ways to understand this moment because this is not the first time we've had these moments.
Not the first time we've been here.
And the thing we have to put aside when we educate people is there's nothing fucking unique about the United States. Okay? Nothing. It is part of the story of human evolution, and it's here for a minute. It'll be gone, and it'll be gone in the next minute.
And Mike, first of all, you didn't take us off. You actually just kind of cemented the need for a historical perspective so that you can have an accurate sequential analysis so that you can have an appropriate theory of the case. Otherwise, you can't. Right? And so we'll take that. And
if you ask the wrong questions, you always get the wrong answers.
Yes. And so, so it's necessary to kind of run through those things. And and because we got to that, and because it's Sunday, this is an appropriate time to just tell folks, whether you like it or not, Black leadership in the 14th and 15th centuries pivoted towards Christianity, not because of spiritual needs, but because it was good for business. Right. Now, you take from that whatever you want, but that's the truth. And so for us to be fighting today as if that thing in and of itself is going to liberate us in this fight, that is really that is really to just discard anything that you possibly could have learned any moment before this very moment.
Jerry L.T. Christmas, I want you to add what you're thinking right now. These gentlemen have laid out a case that foundationally is that which we strive to do Sunday through Sunday in pursuit of our works. What are your thoughts?
They have laid out a tremendous case. The problem is I sit here and think, and especially as I sit here, now down in the Bible Belt,
Woo.
nobody down here has a clue of any of this. Everybody is operating on superstition. If I have to move forward and I think
You
about,
told us about that.
if I think about my family down here now, everybody, the funeral was Friday. We were all together.
Sorry to hear that,
Yeah, we,
JT.
Condolences.
thank you. We were all together yesterday, and then everybody wanted to know if I was gonna be at. We got two different family churches out here. If I was gonna be there this morning, I knew I wasn't gonna be there this morning because I knew I wasn't gonna feel like getting up. But still, I'm just thinking about my whole family romanticized and all this. They don't have a clue, and the pastors down here don't have a clue, and we only doing religion down here because of the supernatural. Everything down here is based on the supernatural.
And
It's
if we
not based on
embrace
the
that, we'd be better
and we
off.
embrace that.
If we embrace that, we'd be better off. But we won't go so far because the entities that they're imitating have told us that black magic stuff, that Hades stuff, will get you killed and go
If
to
we're
hell.
going to do the supernatural, it needs to be African in origin.
Right, but
That is
we're
correct.
not African, but we're not African in origin. That's problematic also. Because that's a whole. You start having an African in origin conversation, then you off into another debate with them, and that that continues to make this such a problematic situation for us because of the impact that religion plays so in our community, and it's so detrimental to us that they are not addressing these serious issues that are happening, especially when we think about just right now in St. Louis with the level of homicides and youth killings that we've had. We started off in March with 13-year-olds committing homicides, and by the time that we are into June, we have 10-year-olds shooting a 10-year-old shooting a 7-year-old infant and killing that individual.
Yeah, 7 months old.
7 months old, I mean, 7 months old. And and we say that like it just roll off like it ain't like it's nothing, And within 90 days, we've gone from 13-year-old to 10-year-old. And I don't know where we're gonna be at in the next 30 days. And it doesn't seem like anybody is concerned about it or wants to come together to have a discussion of how we come up with a code of conduct in our community or anything. Or when we talk about black leadership not saying a word. We all I see is their signage up for re-election all over the city as we get ready for the August primaries, but nobody that's running for office is having any kind of serious conversation with black people about how we move forward.
And we
But question, Gerald, just point of clarity for me. So is the conversation, if there's any, is in terms of particularly this younger shooting situation, are people seeing that as a safety issue, or are people seeing this as a manifestation of crime? Like, what is it that people are, what are they contemplating?
They see it more as a manifestation of crime, just the crime enhancement. And I think that,
They think that the how old you say the shooter was?
10.
They think the 10-year-old shooting, and how old was the victim?
7
7
months.
months.
They think that's a manifestation of crime.
They want him certified as an
Huh?
adult.
I'm saying the people, black folks, they're thinking that that's a manifestation of crime, or are they thinking that's a manifestation of that, or is that a criminal situation or a gun safety situation? How? That's what I'm asking. What do those people think?
I believe they think it's a criminal situation.
Okay.
I believe they ain't even thought about it one way or the other.
Yeah.
That's
They,
possible too. That's
not,
quite
I
possible
think they
too.
may have
And
had an
so
emotional reaction, but they ain't thought about it.
and, and
Okay.
and that's
And
why
Mike is
I'm saying,
probably
Mike,
right
that
about
you
it.
didn't
Mike
take
is
us
probably
off
correct.
task. So you didn't take us off task, Mike. This is what if we can't honestly conceptualize what we say, and when I say we, I'm talking about the masses of black folks. What we say is, the key to our salvation. If we can't get that right, we can't get none of this right. So if we can't get what we consider to be key to our salvation right, then we necessarily have, from that point forward, from that fundamental premises, we can't have no social political theory of the case. Because we don't even understand how we relate to the creative force.
Oh, that is it. That's it, brother. I mean, because we our juxtaposition is dysfunctional.
It's
And
dysfunctional. And so it doesn't matter how many times we see this pattern, we literally think we're starting all over. As
Don't
opposed,
recognize it. We never
we
recognize
never
it.
recognize the pattern.
Right, right. We're not
And
recognizing it.
right. And so then in which case anything will do. If you got
Nor are we even trying to have a discussion
if we're
to
not really
figure
trying to
out
have a serious
how do we
conversation.
know we have not. I To me, them as soon as I heard what had occurred, it popped in my mind. We need to have a serious community discussion on how do we get here, and what we need to be doing as a community, because things are getting worse and worse at a faster pace. And we seem to just be numb to it. A 10-year-old shooting a 7-month-old, and it's as if this happens on a daily basis.
But we know in that particular case, I mean, the younger the kids get, the more this is simply an issue of supervision.
Right.
Now we got to figure out
Well, the
what
19-year-old father, I believe, is in custody also.
yeah, and so we got that. Yeah, those get to be conversations about supervision. Now, is it criminal? I don't know. Like, I don't know what the gun laws are. I know, relative to whether or not he can have a gun. The 19-year-old. The issue gets to be, where is that gun relative to the 10 and the 7-year-old? And so, but
It
if
was
we're
under the
having
mattress.
difficulties just processing that, that speaks to why we struggle otherwise. Like if we're just having difficulty processing that, then it makes sense why, why we get what we get in the metropolitan area. That we can't reason this stuff. If we can't process that, then we can't process Wesley Bell. It's all the same thing.
But Charles, I'm, and one of the things I'm struggling with right now at 77 is not to sound old and cynical, if you know what I mean.
Yes,
You
sir.
start, you get to the point that your critique is all negative, and what you sound like is just another old brother that who's either bitter, mad, or giving up or whatever. But I think one of the other things we've hung on to that's not as true as it once was when you guys were born. And because I know how old all of you are, when you were born into a Black community that was not fully culturally, was never culturally integrated into the larger American community. The mass media of America didn't impact us the same way it impacted them. So there were two realities in Black America. We had two realities. White folks only had one, but we had two realities. Their reality, and we thought of it as collectively as a community. That's how they think about it, and then it's how we think about it. And those two, there was a duality. What Du Bois was talking about in 1904, 1905, and Souls of Black folk. There was that duality that I never thought was that much of a contradiction. I was more like F. Scott Fitzgerald, that you can hold two competing, two contradictory ideas simultaneously and still function as a sign of high intelligence. So that's how I view us managing this contradiction. Then we abandoned the Black intellectual position, and over the next 50 years, we abandoned that, and we became integrated into and I'm using integrated not because we live next door, but we basically metaphysically abandoned our intellectual heritage and point of view, and basically drunk the Kool-Aid, the same Kool-Aid as white folks. Now, we end up, because they're on the 1 and 3 and we're always on the 2 and 4, our rhythm is different than theirs, so it comes out a little bit different, but we're now all functioning in the same fucked up reality. And we don't even have a basis anymore for a Black conversation about white America. Because the overwhelming majority of us are now in the same fucked up place white America is.
Mm-hmm.
So the four of us can have this conversation because y'all
Without
60.
without the safety net.
Right. And the reason we can have it is basically because you all are not as old as me, but old enough to have been curated or incubated in that other America. You literally
We right at the end, Michael.
that.
We right at the end.
That's what I say. You're the end of it.
You know, the next generation
after
us, that's it. We right at the end.
Right.
We right at the tail end, and that's the benefit, I think, and that's why I'm appreciative of being right at the end. You know, because by being right at the end, you get the opportunity to see all of that was ahead of you, and you seen what's developed behind you.
Right.
And it was interesting. I just said that at the funeral on Friday because I'm the baby in the family, you know, the first cousins, because my father was the last of the 11. I'm the baby of them. So I have all these, you know, first cousins who are, you know, 89, 90 and all this stuff. You know, we just came out of two different generations because of the age gap. But because I am at the end, I got, you know, through my whole life, I got to see them. You know what I'm saying? And I got to see all these coming up behind me in this next generation that just don't have the same mindset. And I'm like stuck right here in the middle.
And so any analysis of our situation, any analysis of what we need to do about our situation has to compensate now for who we are.
Exactly.
And part of our problem is our theory of the case presumes something about us that I think is no longer true.
But then the other people don't want to accept who they are now. The people that don't see things the same way that we see them will argue you down that they are not in the place that they're in. They don't realize they're in the place they're in.
But that's like the alcoholic who says, I ain't an alcoholic. I just drink a little too much. I mean, the reality, you got an alcohol problem, man. And until you come to
I think
grips with,
it's closer akin to the battered spouse that says he only beats me when he gets mad.
okay,
Right, right.
right. That's better. That's probably a more accurate metaphor. But and so whatever theory of the case, and I'm gonna argue it'll have to come from somebody in your generational range. You know what I mean? Somebody at the back end of this or the very front end of that who can say, wait a minute, here's the black theory of the case
Mm.
in the 21st century. Okay? And it's grounded in a historical analysis, but it recognizes the change in the ecosystem or the culture, whatever term of what you want to use, and you're applying some different metrics to what we have to do. And um, my concern, and I'll call it a problem, my problem is given the intellectual laziness and sloppiness of the American culture, I don't know if you producing, I don't think you're producing enough thinkers in the aggregate, let alone in the black subgroup to do this. So where, there is no cadre of black intellectuals who are arguing amongst themselves about what this day looks like and what we need to do. And I was strictly that no matter what else was going on in America, one of the things going on, that was always going on is this debate inside the black community, higher level about what this was all about. Never necessarily resolved it, but the issue was always in play. And you can
Do you think the
decide
issue was
who you
always in
were with.
play?
And that,
Do you think the issue was
oh,
always in
yeah,
play
well, I mean,
because of
yeah. Well, you can think of, and Charles straightens out Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, but just take them as avatars that we perceive them in different places arguing about the same thing from a different point of view. Now, in all intellectual arguments, they usually have more in common than they disagree with, and they're disagreeing on the margins, but they kind of got the same fundamental infrastructure of the argument. It just they expand it and explain that their foundation different. And the further it goes out to the public, it looks like they're arguing, but they're really discussing among themselves. But that was always in play. So that's why we could go back and read them. We could talk about them, and we're having those same debates when I come along. But you're referencing why you thought Du Bois was right and Booker T. Washington was wrong, or vice versa. But you get the
Same with
late,
Martin and Malcolm. I mean,
yeah,
your boy Tao, Mao says that that's
right,
fundamental. Mao
right.
says that public discourse was fundamental. And
What did he say? He said, let a thousand flowers bloom, let a hundred let a hundred flowers bloom, and 100 schools of thought contend.
that is correct.
That fundamentally in that argument you find your truth.
That is correct.
Now, our problem is in this culture writ large, but I would suggest you had in the larger culture, you had an American intellectual cadre that was having arguments. So our sub argument was part of a larger cultural phenomenon that was being produced at across the board of the culture. And that's the other thing that we have ignored is that we're operating in the same culture as white folks. And all the culture is how people live life, how a people live.
And how they
And
solve
so
their problems.
right. And so it's impossible for you to share the space and y'all not ultimately have the same, operating in the same cultural context. Now, how you interpret it and how you relate to it can be totally different, but you're being shaped by the same forces.
Well,
And we don't
and
have
it's a
any
start.
understanding that.
It's a stark, and I'm going to go to Amos Wilson here. One culture wants to maintain the status quo, and the other one is looking for revolution. If in fact you are,
Right,
if in fact you have a decent amount of agency, you don't want to maintain the status quo
right.
as a black person. How in the world can you want to
And
conserve
that's
what
the
we have?
conflict. I think that's the conflict we run into now while we're not having those discussions because we don't have that struggle and we don't have a group that wants a revolution enough to have that have that conversation.
But wait a minute. Gerald and Larry make a point. If we had a legitimate educational system where by the time you graduated from undergraduate school, if you went to very good high school and or went to the university, one of the things that you would have read just about as a requirement is the argument between Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine about the French Revolution and the difference between status quo and slow change versus revolution. Now they talk about the French Revolution, but everything they argue with each other applies to moments like this. So that if you go through the Western canon, you will find these larger issues always in play and never resolved. And so you ain't got to start from scratch
Mm-hmm.
with the argument that wait a minute, it's what you guys do as lawyers. You
Mm-hmm.
say, when I put my case together, let me look at the case
The
law.
Right.
precedent.
You
And
look
What
for
is the
see what,
precedent.
precedent? What is the
yeah,
Let's see
precedent?
what's precedent.
But see, that is what this hegemony aims to do, is to keep you thinking that this situation is new and it's never been confronted before. And that's how it
right.
maintains itself, because we act as if there's no continuity. When in fact the things that David Walker talked about in David Walker's appeal are still at play today. And Martin Delaney and Moses Dixon, all the way up through present day, those same things are at play, and the same things have proven successful over time.
Well, it's the same thing we opened with Frederick Douglass and the 1852 speech. His specifics in 1852 are not much different than our specifics today.
Not at
Language
all.
might be language might be a little different. His rhetoric might be different, but the core of the argument,
Yeah, he had better language.
foundationally, yeah,
He had
yeah,
better
he more
vocab.
eloquent.
He had better vocab than
Right.
these 120 character.
Well, but that's because he came along in an era where rhetoric was actually what was a skill set
It was a
that
thing.
it was a thing, right? Okay, okay. But but fundamentally, you would teach Frederick Douglass if you're in a classroom of the best of your high school students. I would teach but to the university. When we get to the Civil War, and I'm in one of those pre-Civil War areas, we have to discuss Douglass of 1852, and then how did that relate? What impact did that have? How do you feel about that? Now, how do you feel about what? How do you see what Douglass said? Now, how does that apply, if it applies, to America in 2026? And I'm saying if you were in a high school in a college prep program I would have expected by the time you got to college, I should expect if I was a history teacher in college, that you would know what I'm talking about. Not that you necessarily had spent a semester on this, but fundamentally, when I bring up Douglas and what that means now at a deeper level, you know what I'm talking about. And that's the stuff where making you more ignorant. I'm not talking about dumber, but just ignorant of the complexity, but also the richness of your intellectual tradition being black in America. You got a way to understand everything that you're looking at today if we just taught you.
That is correct. Dr. Alexander,
What are you asking? What are you asking?
I'm asking your thoughts as we conclude this week's show and uh, uh, to contribute to the foundation and the case that you mapped out, you and Dr. Mike Jones mapped out so eloquently earlier today.
And so I think what we laid out again is while why it is necessary to uh, understand precedent in order for you to more accurately and thoroughly create and implement your theory of the case. The benefit of the larger conversation about the 250 years will be that folks who don't contemplate it otherwise will contemplate it because it's in the media. And so we and other like-minded people have to take advantage of this to put this type of stuff. We have to advance this content within this context, and we get to do it for a year. Well, like this, the work that we do anyway. But for a year, we get to kind of drill down on these things in context of the 250, that the 250 is going to be floating in people's minds because it's in the larger media. Right. And so we get a chance to really help people to understand what we mean to this 250. And based on that historical context, we got to do a better job of how we manage this and the next 250.
Absolutely. If we could transition real briefly, call an audible, understanding that Leslie Graham is no longer on the earth as being reported. Mike, if you could give us just a snapshot of where we are as a result of that, what to expect. And Gerald, we'll go to you directly and close out the show based off of your experience with respect to the Senate and what that means when a senator with that sort of experience dies and the sort of opportunities that may lie for the Democratic Party. Very briefly. Mike, go ahead, please.
Okay, I think first of all, Lindsey Graham is an ordinary politician, and he will not be missed in the Senate as a player. But his passing, Mitch McConnell on his last leg won't be back. Okay, let's say after wheeling in like they did Robert Byrd for one vote that matters, but he ain't coming back. The fact that there are three sitting senators that Trump opposed, that's five. And the woman McCloskey, whatever her name is, from Alaska, is not a Trump supporter. That makes six. Then Kuhn does not have an operating majority, and he only had a 3-vote majority anyway. And since then, everything but a judge and a budget bill that's using reconciliation needs 60 votes to cut off the debate, the Senate will not function from now to the end of the year. And with McConnell, and here's what I will guarantee you: if McConnell dies in the morning, the Democratic governor of Kentucky is not going to replace him. He ain't gonna get a replacement. Okay, because Kentucky passed a constitutional amendment that says if a senator dies or leaves or something, exits the office before his term, then the governor has to appoint somebody from the same party of that senator. So if I'm the Democratic governor, y'all will never see this son of a bitch while I'm sitting here. You damn sure ain't gonna see it before January. So that means Trump's whining and bitching notwithstanding, they can't they can't function. The House already has a margin too thin to really get anything done that matters, and Trump is too stupid and vindictive to operate in any kind of strategic matter. He's a single cell amoeba that responds to light. Okay, so whatever the fuck comes up, so whatever the fuck comes he thinks about today is what's gonna come out of his mouth. So you can't have a plan for Trump.
Damn,
Uh,
that's a
yeah,
bar and a half, isn't it?
yeah,
Damn.
right. So I think they're done for the year, and I'll go back to my frame of reference. The status and state of America is in the hands of white folks. There ain't enough black folks. There's not enough people of color. Even Hispanics who thought their ass wasn't black had found out something different, you know. So I used to tell people, hold the seat for our Hispanic brothers because their ass coming back. They just think they ain't us, and white folks won't do to them what they've done to us. So their ass is sitting next to us now. But it still ain't enough of us to shape and direct the country. So at some point, white folks who know better are going to have to figure out what to do about white folks who want to do better. And the problem with that is you got, I think, there's a critical mass that are organically into justice, fairness, whatever, because they've always been here. They were the abolitionists, they were the white folks in the Underground Railroad, that we wouldn't be here. You know, the Cheney and Goodman, Swan and Goodman with Cheney to Valerie LaRue. So, I mean, so there's always been that minority of white folks. That's make them 30%. And then there's another percentage of white folks. I'll make them 30%. That ain't shit. They Donald Trump. They the Ku Klux Klan. Them motherfuckers have always been here, and they ain't gonna never change. And then you got 40% of white America that are indifferent. I mean, fundamentally, they don't just want to get involved. They don't want to be really overtly racist, but they don't want to be inconvenienced and lose their privilege. And what happens in white America is a function of where the majority of that 40% goes. Sometimes they swing to the left, call that the good side. Other times when they feel stressed, they rally around their whiteness and you get the Trumpism. But ultimately, Trump is a renegade crony capitalist, and you got business socialists like Elon Musk who ain't never built shit. He just been robbed the federal treasury, become a billionaire. And white folks are suffering like this, in the process of suffering like they did during the Great Depression, which is what made Frederick Roosevelt be able to make all of them Democrats for 30, 40 years. So ultimately, November will be a function of what they decide. And then uh, you got to get a Democratic Party that looks like it's trying to get it, that is high bourgeois, uh, hospital cotton, soft ass bitches to to man up and want to take a plug out of Republicans' asses. Fuck America being okay. I just came here to kick your ass. I don't even care if the country blow up while I'm kicking your ass. Fine. If I get to kick your ass while I'm doing that, and come there to try to finish, and if not finish, cripple them forever. And literally, I'm gonna do to you what you did to us. And yeah, we gonna let you see how it feels like being and not only am I gonna make ICE, I'm gonna eliminate Homeland Security. I'm locking up everybody in one of the motherfucking masks that was an ICE agent for something. Okay, and I'll and then we'll sort it out later. There's an old expression that Lyndon Johnson used to use. He said, "Well, what about the innocent, the people who are innocent?" And Johnson would say, "We send them all to hell and let God sort it out." Shit, okay, and that's the way you all look at it. I'm sending everybody to hell, and God will sort it out. Shit, He'll send back everybody I got wrong, but I'm not gonna fuck with you no more. Okay, now if Democrats can step up to that basically to hear the most deadliest thing anybody can tell you. I ain't here for the money no more. Okay, shit. Whatever the deal
Keep
was,
the
I ain't
money.
even
Keep,
interested.
you know what? Go on and keep the
Keep,
money.
keep the money. Okay. Matter of fact, I don't even know how much you owe him because when he don't send me to collect, he send me to take care of you. So depending on can you get enough white folks in that space that at least gets them to the Civil War. Okay, now again, it didn't make them pro-black, but it did make them defend the Union. And then we got to be smart enough to know that them defending the Union ain't necessarily as them defending us. So we gonna have, Larry, you reminded me of something I said years ago. We have to be like lions in a pride, going after the water buffalo. It takes the pride to bring them down, and then we're gonna fight about the kill. But right now, we all got to hunt together. And that's the way we ought to look at it.
That's it.
And, but we can't compensate for them. Okay. They have to bring enough ass to this fight to make it winnable.
That is
And we
true.
can't afford to stay home based on something Charles said earlier. Yeah, that I'm gonna vote Democratic, and that's got to be good enough. So when
We
somebody says,
can't
"Well,
we
they ain't
can't
either,"
uh
fuck that, they ain't them.
we can't compensate for them, Mike, but we have to engage. We have to engage, and we
Yeah, we
have
have
to
to engage.
organize, and we
Right,
got to, and we. I agree with you. They are done for the rest of the year. They are done, but these are some serious openings that have made their way available to us now. I think, Miss McConnell already did. They just keeping him plugged up somewhere,
right.
you know. But he probably been dead for about 2 or 3 weeks already. You know what I'm saying? That's what you gonna find out. That he dead. He already dead. Lindsey Graham then died, and probably somebody else gonna die too
because
before it's all said and done. We'll say that was the Lord working for us because we superstitious. So we'll say that. But the bottom line is this. We got these Senate seat openings, and we have to take advantage of that. It's not enough of us, like you said, to compensate for them, but it's enough of us to push the needle in the Democratic Party. And this is the time where we really got to wake
Right,
them black asses up there, because this is our opportunity to
right,
really step in and get something done and to make a difference. Yeah, we can all hunt with them, and we should all hunt with them. But when you kill ICE, you need to kill some motherfucking mandatory sentencing too that's going along in here that's keeping our
right.
people locked up. This is our time now to challenge this crime bill that has kept our
Well,
people in slavery
Gerald,
and
to that point,
servitude.
well, remember what I said during COVID, that the voting rights bill was the most important bill that everybody thought needed to be renewed. And because of COVID, they said, well, we
We
got to
got
do COVID. We
Juneteenth.
got,
We
yeah.
got Juneteenth.
So, and we
Reparations.
didn't
We
get
need
voted right.
reparations back on the table right now too. You know, because like you said, we took a holiday as opposed to reparations.
But no, we didn't even, yeah, we accepted it because we didn't even ask for the goddamn
You ain't
holiday.
asked for
You're
it.
right. We accepted
Okay.
the holiday. You're right.
Yeah. And so the point is, this time, you got to, I want to see the money before you see the dope. Okay.
Exactly. Exactly. And we know better now. You know,
yeah.
we didn't had a black president.
Yeah.
We didn't had all these other individuals in place. We know better. You're exactly right.
And
show
then,
me the money first before I show you the dope. I got the
right.
dope, but show
Right.
me the money first. And that's where
Right.
we have to be, but we got to be vocal and out front with
and
it.
I'm gonna clean up my language because you just see it because of Sunday and I'm on level set. But when they send Jeffries and Arnak or whoever they send, you tell white folks that's your brother, that ain't mine. I'll send you my brother, okay? But you can't send me he yours, okay?
But we need to pull him aside too. There needs to be a conversation, you know, a come to Jesus conversation with him also, and those individuals.
Wait a minute, I agree, but
because how do you reconcile the fact that, like, even locally right now, how do we reconcile the fact that these people running for office right now don't even talk to each other? I'm talking about the black people. You know, we got all these people, Brian Williams, Joe Palm, Bowman. We got all of these people out here running for office, and they have yet to have one conversation with the black community about what's important for us.
But it's what I say. One of my terms of art that I developed over the 10 years, right, is the entrepreneurial black politician, and understanding the difference between a black elected official and a black political leader. Getting you elected does not make you a political leader,
right?
And so we elect office holders. We know, and there was a time in the eras that we're talking about that you came to elected office because you were a political leader. That's why you got selected, that you could be trusted with our political destiny. The people run now, they don't even think they're responsible for our political destiny.
Right.
So they have not betrayed you. They've been ignorant of, unaware of that was the moral responsibility when you took the office. And the only reason you take the elected office is so you can politically lead, okay, and speak for and to the black community on these kinds of issues, as opposed to figuring out, asking, well, I wonder what they want. Oh, we picked you to tell us what you gonna do. Now, if I got fuck to do, I don't need your ass. That's like I'm a fan and you the head coach, and you in the red zone at the end of the game, and we need to play, and you turn around and asking me what play should you call.
Right.
That's the dumbest shit in the world. So, but that's what we're producing now.
But right,
so I don't know how you
critical
get
state.
back.
Don't you see that as also we're at the same critical state locally where we are nationally? Because these people.
But I don't know how you. I don't know. I swear to God, I don't know how you fix it though. Because it ain't just
that was not look, and that was not the answer I was anticipating from you.
Because if I knew how to say it,
truth hurts.
I wouldn't be no secret. If I knew, it
that was
no
not
secret,
the answer I was waiting on.
Fuck if I know. That's the answer, man.
Well, we will take these questions under submission, and hopefully we can come back next week with some answers. We thank you for tuning in to the Level Set, and I want to personally thank the Mike Jones, the Dr. Charles Alexander, and the one and only Jerry L. T. Christmas attorney at law. I'm Larry Fields. Thank you all very, very much for tuning in to the Level Set.